Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition. I'm Jon Macri, and here we go. Round two of the fantasy football playoff starts now. Hopefully, all of you progress through round one, which is why you'd be listening to this in the first place. And if so, then we still got some work to do. We're looking for 2 more wins. That's all we need to bring home a fantasy championship. Plenty has to go right still, but the best we can do is prepare, play the odds, and optimize our lineup decisions with some good old-fashioned data, and I've got plenty of it for you. So let's get it. All right, folks, we're on to the fantasy football semifinals, the most important week of the year so far. There is one more to go, but to get there, we have to survive this week and put together the best lineup possible. And hopefully, everything that I go over today will help you in that regard, since I'll be going game by game, breaking down all of our key matchup data, player insight, and information to help you with those very important decisions for your lineups. And if there is something that I don't cover or you want more clarification on, then always feel free to shout questions in the comments and I'll hop in there to get those answered. You can also check out the IDP rankings linked in the episode description, IDP fantasy report as well for all the snap counts and data nuggets and waiver targets, all those kinds of things that have been in there all season long. I'll also include timestamps in the episode description so you can find the games that you're looking for. Yeah, because we got all the games this week. It's another full slate of games. Bye weeks are done. So we're going to go through them all, and we're going to start with Thursday Night Football's AFC West showdown between the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers. And how do we not start with Nick Bonito at this point? He has been one of the biggest breakouts this season and just continues to add monster games to his resume, finding his way into the end zone for another defensive touchdown last week. This week, I have Bonito as a top 12 edge because, I mean, at this point, he's earned a locked in spot in our IDP lineups. It is important to note that he will line up almost exclusively against Chargers left tackle Rashawn Slater, who has been a top 3 offensive tackle on the year thanks to his elite pass blocking ability. That being said, and I'm totally aware that this isn't real analysis, so take it how you will. Benito just continues to find a way. I mean, the guy has been in on a sack for every game but one over his last 12 games played, and with the other big plays in there as well, as incredibly unstable as they are, it's going to take really kind of one of the truly elite edges to make me sit him this week. So yeah, Nick Bonito still a starter for us. Jonathan Cooper is playing quite a bit, playing well too, but treating him more as like a low end edge 2 for me this week, potentially high end edge 3. Zach Allen, DT5 this week, playing so much. He's doing a great job for us all year. So not many defensive tackles that I'm starting over him at this point. The DT required especially. Looking at the the Broncos linebackers. So Justin Sternad had an increased role last week. He played a season high 93% of snaps. He played 91% the game before that. So there's a bit of a trend here that I think, IDP managers could potentially trust him a little bit more in deeper leagues if needed. He hasn't been the most productive player, but we're looking for snaps more than anything in weeks where we're looking for fill-ins. There's always the chance that he'll dip back to that 60% range, as 90% in 2 straight, 82% in the game prior to that. Even that's at least encouraging for him, but still treating him as kind of an LB4 type, because 90-ish% of snaps is a fine spot to be in. The only issue being that like I said, he's been really inefficient this year. 10.8% tackle rate, not great. So just keeping that in mind. Cody Barton, I also have as more kind of an LB3 this week. This is a very man-heavy defense. So this is something we talked about in the offseason. We will again, but man-heavy defenses have been killers for linebacker tackle efficiency, and there's a few teams like that this year. So treating these guys more LB3 at best. Sternad probably more in the LB4 range. And then the other option for the Denver Broncos is Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones is another guy that's performed really well this year. He's a top 12 safety for me this week. He's really the one that I'm looking to start here. Not interested in PJ Locke, but really Brandon Jones has been the tackle vacuum of that deep secondary. 11.2% tackle rate. So better than Justin Sternad at linebacker, which is hard to do. So shout out to Brandon Jones. He continues to be set in our lineups. On the Chargers side of things, so looking at their defensive line, this is not the best pass rush matchup for the Chargers. The Broncos are the best pass blocking unit in the league. And Bo Nix has been among the best quarterbacks in the league at not letting pressures turn into sacks. So that limits a lot of the sack opportunities this week. So Khalil Mack, I have probably the highest of the group. I have him as edge 17, Joey Bosa edge 25, and Tuli Tuipulotu as edge 36. So for Tuli specifically, he's regressed quite a bit since his 7 sacks in 4 games from weeks 8 to 11. Just a half sack over his last 4 games. He's playing enough. There's not really a lot of concern there, as the Chargers have kind of found ways to utilize all 3 of their edges now, that they're all healthy. But the Broncos are one of the, like I said, if not the best pass blocking unit in the league. They're also allowing just the 3rd lowest tackles per game to opposing defensive linemen. So that floor for Tuipulotu also becomes a little bit lower this week, and the ceiling is cut off significantly. So odds are against him this week. He'd be somebody that I'd be looking to avoid outside of deeper leagues. Also on the Chargers, Diane Henley, I have as LB13, but Troy Dye, who is coming off a great game. He had 9 tackles and a sack last week. The problem is that he's played fewer than 60% of the defensive snaps in back-to-back games. So we're not trusting that in the semifinals, outside of the deepest leagues again, but we see the production. It looks good, but looking at the snap share, it is not a sustainable number. It's also a bad matchup. The Broncos ranked 27th in tackles allowed to the linebacker position. So you add that into a player who's playing less than 60% of snaps. Troy Dye is not somebody we should be chasing the production on this week. Chargers safeties, I got Derwin James as safety 7. Elijah Molden appears to be doubtful this week, so it doesn't look like he's going to be going. So Marcus May and Tony Jefferson, both of those guys rotated quite a bit last week, as well as Molden. So in this scenario, I'd be looking to avoid both guys, because I think there's a good chance that May and Jefferson rotate again with neither one of them playing a full-time role. There's a chance that it could be. I just don't really want to figure it out. I think we just stick with Derwin James here. We find a safety somewhere else just to be safe this week. All right, let's go to the Saturday games now, and we'll start with the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs. So starting with the Chiefs are the Texans defensive line, because it does seem that Patrick Mahomes is going to play. He's fully practiced now for 2 straight days, recording this on Wednesday. So again, a lot can change in between now and Saturday, but that does make it a little bit tougher for the pass rushers than having like Carson Wentz back there. But if Mahomes is dealing with an ankle sprain, that does, limit his mobility, I would say, quite a bit. But Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson, these guys have both been so good this year. I have them both inside the top 10 edge rushers this week. But yeah, it's really not the worst matchup in the world anymore. The Kansas City Chiefs for pass rushers, because what's had to happen is that due to injuries, the Chiefs have actually had to move their left guard, Joe Thuney, to play left tackle. And he really struggled there last week. He gave up 10 pressures and had his worst game of the year by far. He's usually a very, very good left guard, but you move a guy like that to left tackle, it's a completely different position, and it did not work out well. So interestingly, Daniil Hunter was the one to line up versus the left tackle last week more often than Anderson, which hasn't been the case for most of the year. So will be interesting to see if that happens again. But I do imagine that both of these guys are going to get their opportunities against Joe Thuney at left tackle, that being the more optimal matchup. But again, they've both been great. So I think we could just continue to start both of those guys this week as well. The other name for the Texans is Christian Harris, the linebacker. So he came back last week and stepped back into a starting role. It was not a full-time role yet. Harris is, I would say, arguably the Texans' top active linebacker at the moment. And with another healthy week here, I think he should increase his snap share from the 82% that he played in his season debut last week. He should probably be closer to a full-time role here in week 16, going against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are allowing the 8th most tackles per game to opposing linebackers. So it makes it a really nice matchup for him as well. So if you're wondering if you can trust Christian Harris in his second week back, I would say yes. I have him as LB24 this week. I have Henry To'o as LB23. Nothing really changes for him. But yeah, obviously those are the two. Neville Hewitt is not an option anymore, but Christian Harris definitely has become one here now that he's back in the lineup. Only other note I had for the Texans was that Jimmy Ward, listed as a safety on most platforms, most likely, he was playing the nickel role in place of Jalen Petrie, who is on injured reserve. He had a really nice game last week because he played 97% actually of the snaps. Could be a fine play again if they leave him out there to cover Travis Kelce. I typically prefer Eric Murray a little bit more if I'm looking at Texans safeties, but just because Murray gets a better box roll. But Jimmy Ward could have an opportunity here as well. Again, if he's covering Kelce, if he remains in that nickel role, but there's some risk there as well. Looking at Kansas City, so George Karlaftis is coming off a 2-sack game. Really nice production from him, obviously. He's always been kind of more a volume-dependent play. He's playing enough where, he could fall into production on any given week. CJ Stroud is struggling to avoid sacks so far this year. So Karlaftis is an option. He's just more on that kind of fringe edge 2, edge 3 range for me. And then Chris Jones as well, like, is another guy that I get asked a lot about. He's only got the 5 sacks on the year. It's a down year for him, no doubt about it, in the sack column, because it has not been a down year everywhere else. He's been as dominant as ever. 90.7 pass rush grade, 66 total pressures. Both of those marks lead the position. He's second in win rate, 17.5%. Draws the interior offensive line of the Houston Texans this week, who rank bottom 10 as a unit in pass blocking grade. They've allowed 21 total sacks this year, which leads the league as far as interior offensive line units sacks allowed. And that's helped CJ Stroud take the second most sacks in the league as well. So this was something that we talked about last week with Zach Sealer in Miami, right? And he managed 1.5 sacks in that game. Not saying that it's going to be a multi-sack game for Chris Jones, but that's the whole reason that we play him, is because he's capable of those multi-sack games. So still like Chris Jones quite a bit this week, going against the Houston Texans. Kansas City's linebackers, Nick Bolton, LB26 this week. Again, he's on that fringe kind of LB2, LB3 range. He's now top 20 in IDP scoring, but he's done it more off big plays. So a little concerning there in a week like this, where maybe there isn't necessarily a lot of meat on the bone for like a strong tackle floor to help make up for maybe missing on those big plays. Texans are one of the poorer matchups for linebacker tackles. So again, the fringe LB2, LB3 for me this week. Moving on to the other Saturday game, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. So the biggest question here is going to be if TJ Watt is going to play. Again, it's Wednesday. He was a limited participant today. So if he's active, we play him. It's a tougher matchup versus the Ravens, of course, but TJ Watt is not a player we're benching in IDP. Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, they're the other choices. Herbig definitely becomes more viable if TJ Watt is out. I have Alex Highsmith as edge 14 this week. Herbig, I would say he'd be pretty close to that if TJ Watt is out, but the Ravens offensive line and Lamar Jackson are kind of what pushed them outside the top 12 this week. But both of those guys are among the best pass rushers at the position. So they can overcome matchups like this. It just makes them a little bit riskier because of Lamar Jackson. So like them, but not nearly as much as like if TJ Watt were able to go. And then Cam Hayward, too, is the other piece of that defensive line. I got him as DT3 this week. The guy has been as consistent as they come all season long. 8 sacks to his already strong tackle production on the year. Coming off maybe one of the quieter games in week 15. Should be no reason to kind of turn away from this guy. 36-year-old defensive tackle, and he is currently on track to set a new career high in pass rush grade. He has an 86.6 right now, and it's his 14th NFL season. He's been amazing. Like I said, Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens, they do create a difficult pass rushing matchup for this week, but Hayward has played so well. He's one of the better bets to overcome the matchup. He also has a strong opportunity here, I think, to rack up tackles and create a better floor. Ravens yielding the 6th most tackles per game to opposing defensive linemen this season. So that does help a little bit. We also got Pat Queen in a revenge game, part 2, I guess. So I got him as LB12 this week. It's actually a really nice tackle matchup. Ravens 10th in that regard. Plus, you add in the revenge game narrative there. I think this could be one of Queen's better games. Definitely worth a start. And then maybe the most interesting part of this game is Minkah Fitzpatrick. So if Deshaun Elliott is out again, which he was last week, I start to like Minkah Fitzpatrick a little bit more, because with Elliott out last week, Fitzpatrick actually played 45% of his snaps in the box, and he had only spent 13% of his snaps in the box prior to this week. And then that resulted in better production, right? He managed 8 total tackles. That was a mark that he had not hit since week 5. So there's opportunity there. It's a little bit above average matchup here for safety tackles, but it's really the alignment that we like more than anything. And because we've seen what the Steelers are going to do in this situation, they'll let DeMonte KZ play more deep and give an opportunity for Minkah Fitzpatrick closer to the line of scrimmage. So if Deshaun Elliott is out this week, I like Minkah Fitzpatrick within that kind of top 15 range. Same thing for Elliott. If he's in this week, I put him in that same range as well. Other than that, we'll go to the Ravens, I guess, here, and start with, I guess we'll start with Roquan Smith. So Roquan Smith, I mean, well, we don't really got to talk about Roquan Smith. What the hell am I talking about? LB1 for me this week. The other interesting part is Malik Harrison. So Malik Harrison, he is the LB2 right now for the Ravens. He played 79% of snaps last week, but that might not be as high this week. He got all the way up to 79% because he stayed on in garbage time and took over Roquan's LB1 role for pretty much the entire 4th quarter. It still might be around 70% though, so that's not bad. So he's a good deep league option in a good matchup here against the Steelers, who are allowing the most tackles per game to the linebacker position. Trenton Simpson is a non-factor now. We do not have to worry about him. We're not going to be playing him this season. He's a conversation for the offseason, but right now it's Roquan and Malik Harrison. As far as the defensive line goes, I don't mind Madubuike this week. I'm avoiding Odafe Owe. He's just not playing enough over these past couple of weeks. He only played 27% of snaps in week 13. Then week 15 coming out of their bye, just 47% of snaps, and he was 3rd on the depth chart there. So a really hard time trusting that, especially in a week like this. Kyle Hamilton is definitely still an option. We know he isn't playing as much in the slot, but they're at least rotating him down a bit more into the box. He actually played 40% of snaps in the box last week for Kyle Hamilton. So I have him just outside the top 12 in an average matchup for safeties, but there's definitely some opportunity for Kyle Hamilton to still get some decent IDP alignments and hopefully have some better games, because he's been quiet here recently. Ardarius Washington, he's more kind of in that safety 3, safety 4 range for me this week. Going to the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals, Myles Garrett is coming off another dominant pass rush performance, which included 3 QB hits, a 32% win rate, and 32% pressure rate. Now, he faced Patrick Mahomes last week, who continues to be one of the more difficult quarterbacks to bring down for a sack. None of the Browns were able to do so. it doesn't matter this week. Like Garrett should remain in IDP lineups. I got him as edge 3 this week. Joe Burrow's done a nice job avoiding sacks as well, but the Cincinnati offensive line hasn't been nearly as good as most teams in the league. Really, there's definitely opportunity here for Myles Garrett. As far as the Cleveland linebackers go, I got Jordan Hicks as more of an LB3. Mohamed Diabate, his snap share actually dropped. He was kind of in that 80% range. He went down to, I think it was 56% last week, and it's an average matchup for linebacker tackles. So Diabate more of an LB5 this week. So he's not somebody that is necessarily as viable. There'll be some other options that I'll mention here in a bit to potentially replace him if you need to for those deeper leagues. And then Grant Delpit as well. I got him as safety 8 this week. I love the box heavy role. Obviously, we've talked about that before. It's a top 10 matchup for safety tackles. Continue to like Grant Delpit's opportunity to produce for us. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals now. And I want to start with Joseph Osai because on the recap show, I kind of wrote off Osai as an IDP option for these final 2 weeks, but I think that was dumb on my part because he was back to playing behind Sam Hubbard last week. And even though I knew Hubbard got hurt, I was down more on the fact that we didn't get much encouraging metrics in like the ideal pass rush matchup versus Tennessee, was why I felt like it doesn't get much better than that for Osai. However, Hubbard is down for the year, and Osai's snaps are in a safe place again. Plus, this week's matchup versus the Browns is another good one here for pass rushers, considering their offensive line and how poor they've been. Now they've got Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, so it should continue to be a strong matchup for pass rushers. That being said, Osai really kind of a low-end edge 2 this week. Like I got him as edge 23. I'm hesitant about it. There's others in that range that might be close enough. If you got a better gut feeling on and Osai is an option for you, let me know and we can talk through it. But yeah, he's still in play. There's just a little bit of discouragement because he wasn't able to do anything against Tennessee. Trey Hendrickson on the other end, I have his edge 6 this week. I love Trey Hendrickson still. He's been excellent all season. As far as the linebackers for the Bengals go, Jermaine Pratt, LB15, Akeem Davis-Gaither, LB31 for me. These guys they're in play. They're 100% snap linebackers. All 100% snap linebackers are close for me. It's just an average matchup. The safeties for Cincinnati, Jordan Battle, I got a safety 21 this week. He did play 90% of snaps, so it wasn't 100%, but pretty close. And the main thing is that he played 44% of his snaps in the box. Now, the Browns are just 26th in tackles allowed per game to the safety position, so that's what kind of puts him on the lower end of safety 2 range, despite the strong box alignment. Plus, with a new quarterback now, who knows if that'll go up or down, but still like him as a starter because of the usage in like 2 safety leagues. Geno Stone, not as much. He's been productive. I think he's got back-to-back weeks with an interception. He had a pick 6 last week, playing a very deep role. Don't like the matchup. Don't like chasing that production. So I would not be starting necessarily Geno Stone this week. Okay, that's that game. Let's go to the Giants and the Giants and the Atlanta Falcons next. So start with the Giants. Well, let's start with Dane Belton because Dane Belton is coming off a massively productive Week 15 game. In his first opportunity to step into that Tyler Nubin role, we talked about him last week. He was in a lot of start-sit questions for me, and somebody that I had to start. And man, am I happy that he did. 14 total tackles, which included a sack. Look, he's going to be hard-pressed to repeat that level of production, but his usage and the matchup at least offer encouragement that he could continue as one of the better starting IDP options at the position once again. He's facing the Atlanta Falcons this week, who have yielded the most tackles per game to opposing safeties this season, and they've actually allowed much more tackles per game to safeties over the last 3 games. The only thing is that, again, they have the change at quarterback now. So Michael Penix is going to be at quarterback, not Kirk Cousins. Could shake up those numbers a bit, but I think the overall offensive approach by the team should likely remain the same. So that helps Belton's case on top of that box heavy role. He played 42% of the snaps in the box last week. And I think he'll be in a great spot here to rack up tackles once again. At least I'm hoping he does, because like a lot of you that played Dane Belton, he helped me win last week, and hoping that he can do the same thing again here this week. So the other New York Giants IDPs to consider: Brian Burns, I got his edge 13 this week. Kayvon Thibodeau, I have his edge 34. So mentioned the change at quarterback from Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix. Kirk Cousins was very good at avoiding sacks. One of Michael Penix's calling cards in college was his ability to avoid sacks. He managed an incredibly strong 6.5% pressure to sack conversion rate across a very long college career. So Kayvon Thibodeau is the guy that I'm worried about the most, right? I mentioned edge 34, low end edge 3. He's really struggled as a pass rusher this year. Just had his second sub 50.0 pass rush grade of the season. I've said this a few times already this week. That's very bad and very hard to do for a player playing as much as he is, and especially of his caliber, right? So, or a supposed caliber coming out of college. He's definitely getting a ton of snaps, so that's great. I just worry that he's not quite good enough to win often and quickly enough to get to a quarterback whose strong suit has been pocket awareness, right? So that's where the concern comes from Thibodeau. He can absolutely still get sacks, and that changes everything. But a lot of the underlying metrics with him are really discouraging. So that's where I just have a hard time trusting him in a week like this. For the Giants linebackers, we'll see if Bobby Okereke is back or not this week. If he is, I think we were fine to start him. Um, he's going to step back into a full-time role more than likely. Otherwise, Micah McFadden is an option again. McFadden would be the other guy to step into the 100% role if Okereke can't go. It is a bad matchup. At least it has been this season. Again, new quarterback might change things, but they're on the lower end of tackles per game to the linebacker position. So whoever that LB1 is for the Giants, I probably have as kind of a low end LB2 at best. The other interesting thing is that Darius Moasow played a 100% snap roll alongside Micah McFadden last week, which is something that we haven't seen all year from the Giants linebackers, is two full-time guys. So he'd also be in consideration as more of an LB3 instead of his usual kind of LB4-5 range when if Okereke is out. So just keep an eye on him. He could be somebody that becomes viable in your league formats if you're looking for a kind of deeper league replacement. For Atlanta, we'll start with their linebackers because Troy Anderson landed on IR right before last game. And unfortunately, Nate Landman is still unstartable. He actually rotated with JD Bertrand, even with Troy Anderson out of the lineup. And this was something that we talked about even before last time Troy Anderson was hurt. We had to keep an eye on if JD Bertrand was going to be in the lineup because the Falcons clearly don't trust Nate Landman in a full-time role. And Bertrand, he actually got the better role. It wasn't great still because he at least got to stay on the field in obvious passing situations where Nate Landman did not. So not trusting either of the kind of secondary linebacker options for Atlanta. It is Caden Ellis and Caden Ellis only there. As far as their defensive line goes, again, these guys they're the non-playable characters here. They proved it again last week. There was nothing there for them. I don't know. Atlanta's not that interesting. The other player we haven't talked about in a bit, I guess, is my guy Sweet D Alford. So he isn't always in a good matchup to produce like IDP relevant production, which is just kind of the nature of his nickel corner role. However, this week against the New York Giants, who spend 73% of offensive snaps in 11 personnel, that's the seventh highest rate. That should keep him on the field enough to kind of be in starting consideration again for CB required formats this week if you're looking for a streamer. The Giants are also yielding the third most tackles per game to opposing cornerbacks. And that obviously plays in his favor as well. Alford actually owns an 11.9% tackle rate on the year. That's a really high-end mark for the position. So don't mind D Alford as a streamer every once in a while, and especially in matchups like this. All right, New England and Buffalo are next, and we'll start with New England's defensive line, just because it's hard to like this matchup for any of the New England defensive linemen. Like I have Keon White as like edge 31 this week, Christian Barmore as DT 24. The Bills pass blocking unit is very good. Josh Allen is even better at avoiding sacks. So just not loving this group as a unit. Same thing with the linebackers, really. New England's linebackers, specifically Jelani Tavai, he's going to be the one that's most rostered here. He's played fewer than 85% of snaps in 3 of his last 4 games. He's also not particularly good. He has an 11.8% tackle rate. That's below average for the position. It's a man-heavy defense, another one of those. And it's an average matchup for linebacker tackles. So got a feeling the Bills are going to take advantage of him when he is on the field, which could mean that the Pats lighten his workload just to kind of avoid that. So he's more in that LB4, LB5 range for me this week. Other than that, the safeties for New England. So Kyle Duggar, I got a safety 3, Jabril Peppers, safety 28. So Peppers has been fine as far as production goes, but just 19% of his snaps in the box last week. He played 48% deep. Kyle Duggar is really the clear prime role that we're targeting for IDP. He played 43% of his snaps in the box and just 30% deep. And he's the guy that we trust the most here in a fine matchup against the Bills. On the Buffalo side of things, we'll start with their linebackers because Matt Milano, questionable right now with the groin injury. Got a feeling he's probably not going to play. We'll see how it goes here throughout the week. Again, still early, so a lot can change. But I think Dorian Williams is he's the replacement for Matt Milano. Now, it didn't seem that way right away last week because Balin Spector came in when Matt Milano got hurt. The only reason for that was because Dorian Williams was also banged up at the time. He was getting checked out for injury. He ended up coming back in and closing out the game as a full-time player next to Terrell Bernard. So Dorian Williams is our replacement. Matt Milano had actually played 100% of snaps up until getting injured. We had talked about him in a couple weeks, for a couple weeks where he was playing that 75% snap share and coming off on obvious passing downs. The Bills looked like they were ready to trust him again in that full-time role. Then, of course, he gets hurt. So it's possible that Dorian Williams plays a better snap share than his usual kind of 75% snap range. I think it probably depends on if the starting DBs or safeties specifically are out for the Buffalo Bills again, because Taylor Rapp and Damar Hamlin both missed last game. So they did not have their full complement of starting options on defense. And we know that they trust Milano more than Williams, so it's not a guarantee that Williams plays a 100% role, but the starting safeties being out could play a part in that, since they were only able to use one full-time safety, which was Cam Lewis, and then they had to rotate the other guys, so they couldn't do as much of the sub-package stuff, so they relied on 2 full-time linebackers. So there's at least a chance here that the Dorian Williams role could be better than what it's been previously when he was a starter. For the Buffalo safeties, I just mentioned them, Taylor Rapp and Damar Hamlin, both of those guys on the low-end safety 2 range this week. It's an average matchup, but they also need to be healthy, right? So we'll see if they're able to go. If they're not able to go, or one of them isn't able to go, the replacement that I'd be looking for is Cam Lewis. I would not be looking at the Cole Bishop, who ended up splitting time last week with, I think it was Kareem Jackson. So yeah, we're just looking at Cam Lewis as a replacement if one or both of these guys can't go. Greg Rousseau, also for Buffalo. I got him as edge 10 this week. He is in the midst of a breakout season, currently on pace for a career high in pass rush grade, currently owns an 83.0. And he's just 4 total pressures away from surpassing his best season in that regard as well, with 62. And he's just 1 sack away from setting a new career high there as well, with potentially getting to 9. So he's going up against the New England Patriots right tackle Demontre Jacobs, who Demontre Jacobs owns a 42.4 pass blocking grade on the year. That ranks 76th among 80 qualifying offensive tackles. Now, Russo, he doesn't stay exclusively locked to one side, but his competition at left tackle is Vidarian Lowe. He ranks just like 56th among 80 qualifying offensive tackles in pass blocking grade. So it's a nice matchup all around for Greg Rousseau. Like him quite a bit. Ed Oliver as well had his best game of the season this past week. Season high 9 total pressures and a sack in that game against Detroit with a 90.3 overall grade. That was his best mark this season. And it was actually his best mark since 2022 when he had a 91 overall grade also against Detroit. So Ed Oliver's got something against the Lions or that he plays really hard. But no, he's a talented player. He's been pretty inconsistent this season, and he's kind of become a little bit difficult to trust for IDP. But DT required leagues, he's still one of those options that I think we're always in consideration for. And in a positive matchup like this, I don't mind trusting Ed Oliver if you need to. Okay, let's go to Arizona and Carolina next. And we'll start quickly with the Arizona linebackers. So Kaiser White, I got his LB20 this week. We'll see if Mac Wilson is able to play or not. He got hurt last game, so he was out. He was replaced by Chris Barnes. Now, this is not a full-time role for Chris Barnes or Mac Wilson. And it's a poor matchup. So the Panthers are only allowing the 29th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So if you're relying on a Mac Wilson or a Chris Barnes, I think it's really kind of in like as a desperation play in deep leagues only. Other than that, I mean, Buda Baker just got paid. So shout out to Buda Baker, a friend of the show, by the way. We got him as safety one this week. One of those matchup proof players. We continue to lock him into lineups every single week. He's been amazing. Jalen Thompson, I got a safety 27, not as matchup proof as Buda Baker. So that's really kind of the Cardinals for me. Let's move on to the Carolina Panthers now, because evidently I haven't shown enough love to the Carolina Panthers IDPs in recent weeks, because I got two separate questions about why I didn't cover both DJ Wanham and I think it was their safeties as well here. So I'm going to try to make up for it this week. So for Wanham, I've probably talked briefly about him somewhere, whether it was on this show or in the IDP report a few weeks ago, it was most likely, but I've always referenced him as a more kind of volume dependent option on the defensive line. And that rarely ever changes with him, because he's not somebody that puts up really strong pass rush metrics or anything like that, where he's going to rise significantly up the ranks, but he's always playing enough that he'll probably just always be in consideration for those deeper leagues. Whether, you know, if you've been starting him, you're probably just continuing to start him because he's playing like 75 to 80% of the defensive snaps. You're not doing it because he's talented. You're doing it because he's getting great playing time and he's falling into production there. So like last week, he had a 0% win rate, 0% pressure rate for what it's worth. So this is not a strong pass rush matchup for him against Arizona and Kyler Murray, but it is like an average matchup for defensive line tackles. He really just kind of lives in that edge 3, edge 4 range pretty much at all times for me in the ranks. So that's kind of why I haven't talked about him too much, basically. And then A'Shawn Robinson, we like him. I got him as DT 10 this week. He continues to be a strong DT required option. The Carolina linebackers are somewhat interesting in that both Trevin Wallace and Clouden Sherrillis landed on injured reserve this week. So John Radigan could be the next man up now. It's highly unlikely to be a full-time role, but it is a good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who are giving up the second most tackles per game to the linebacker position. If Radigan can play 75% of snaps, which we're probably projecting him for somewhere around there, there's like potential for a solid enough game in there that we can get some use out of him in really deep leagues, right? It's always a risk trusting a guy that we haven't seen it from this season, but the Panthers right now do not have any more options. So this could be one of those really deep league desperation plays. If you need it, it's John Radigan. Of the Panthers, the other Panthers player is Xavier Woods. So he was the other player that I believe people wanted to hear about last week. He's put together like a quietly productive season. He's currently sitting as the overall safety 12 on the year per our scoring. He's managed an above average 10% tackle rate. He's playing about 32% of his snaps in the box, which, look, it's not overly exciting, the box snap share, but it's definitely a solid deployment for IDP purposes. He also never leaves the field. He leads the position in total snaps this season. That's a major factor in him sitting as high as he is in IDP scoring. But like I said, he's also been a little bit above average as far as tackle efficiency goes. And he draws a matchup against the Arizona Cardinals this week, who are allowing the sixth most tackles per game to opposing safeties and the second most tackles per game over the last 3 games. So while they're averaging 14.4 on the year, they're averaging 18.7 over the last 3 games. So could be a really nice matchup again for Xavier Woods, who I have as safety 15 this week. All right, let's go to the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears next. And starting with the Lions and Zadarius Smith and company, the Lions they're decimated by injuries right now. Like no team even comes close at this point. The Detroit versus everybody saying it includes the injury Grim Reaper apparently. But yeah, Smith is one of the last men standing along this defensive line. He gets a good matchup against Caleb Williams, who is the most sacked quarterback in the NFL. So he's kind of that edge two-ish as well, on the fringe of edge 2, edge 3 for me this week. Zadarius Smith, he'd be the one that I trust the most if you want to take advantage of this matchup against the Bears. Jack Campbell is the only Detroit linebacker I'm trusting. I got him as LB 19 this week. Not trusting any of the other Detroit linebackers right now. It's just too heavy of a rotation in those other spots. Like Ben Neiman, if you literally have no other choice, because he played the most of the group last week at like 62%, I think it was. But that can change on any given week just based on what they've shown us all year and even going back to last year, right? So as much as Ben Neiman was the secondary linebacker last week, it doesn't necessarily lock him into that role this week just because of how the Detroit defense works. And then Brian Branch, got him as safety 6 this week. What did you have? A 15 tackle game last week? Yeah, just leave him in starting lineups. Okay, going to Chicago now. So Montez Sweat, I have as edge 38. He is continuously fallen in the ranks for me. He's just not been very good at all, I think, relative to expectations this year. 64.5 pass rush grade. That is currently his worst mark for a season since his rookie year when he had a 64.0. Now, all he has to do this week is line up against Penei Sewell at right tackle with Jared Goff at quarterback, who has done a nice job not letting pressures turn into sacks this year. So it's a no thanks for Montez Sweat for me this year. Really kind of a dud year for him. We'll see if he can bounce back from it, but not somebody that I want to trust in the fantasy playoffs right now. As far as their linebackers go, I don't think we need much analysis on TJ Edwards. He's been excellent all season. I got him as LB2. Jermaine Edmonds, definitely startable. He's not nearly as efficient as TJ Edwards, but nice matchup here going against the Detroit Lions, who are giving up the 3rd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. More interestingly, though, there are safeties in Chicago. So Kevin Byard, definitely startable. I got him as safety 4. The other safety spot, though, so Jonathan Owens, he's been fine for us. Like, he's definitely been somebody that I've started in IDP lineups because he's been filling in that Jaquan Brisker role. But last week, this was something that we kind of warned about heading into the week and heading into previous weeks when we didn't know when Elijah Hicks was going to be back. Elijah Hicks did return last week. Now, Hicks, again, he's been the starter, previously filling in for Brisker, but then he got hurt. So Owens was the next man up after Elijah Hicks. And what happened was that Owens, to his credit, he played well enough in both of Brisker and Hicks's absence that he didn't lose his role completely, but they ended up splitting the role. So Jonathan Owens played 55% of snaps. Elijah Hicks played 45% of snaps. Somehow that is worse for IDP managers because now we can't use either of these guys. So we're avoiding the Chicago safeties, not named Kevin Byard this week. All right, let's go to the Los Angeles Rams and the New York Jets next. And we'll start with Jared Verse versus Olu Fashanu. So 2 rookies going at it this week. Jared Verse, I like him. I still have him in that edge 2 range. He's definitely cooled down a bit, but still very good. On the opposite side of this matchup for Verse is Olu Fashanu, who's another rookie he's actually he's been heating up as much as Verse has been cooling down. So in the early part of the year, Fashanu was somebody that we had highlighted to start players against. But since then, since cementing himself as like a consistent starter, he's been much better. So from weeks 10 to 15, Fashanu ranks 24th in pass blocking grade, 77.1. Now that it doesn't sound amazing, but when you compare it to weeks 1 to 9, he ranked 77th among 78 offensive tackles in pass blocking grade. So again, he's still not perfect. He's still a rookie, and so is Verse. It's just that Verse probably still more in that edge 2 range for me again this week. Still continue to like him, but uh, tougher matchup than we might think this week. As far as the linebackers for the Rams go, Christian Roseboom, aka Princeton, continue to like him as an LB3. It's just so hard to put him much higher than LB3 range, even though like he consistently puts up like stupid tackle numbers on no more than what, like 80% of snaps usually. He actually played 87% last week. So I'm fine to start him if you want. Just keep in mind that it's not a great matchup this week against the Jets, who've been very stingy with linebacker tackles this year. They rank 30th in that regard. But like we've been talking about for a while now, Christian Roseboom continues to overcome and be as efficient as they come at the linebacker position. So there's risk there in that could go away at any point. But if you've been trusting him as kind of an LB3, I think you're fine. Uh, yeah, the Rams safeties are the only other thing worth talking about. So somehow, as stingy as the Jets are to linebackers, they're even worse to opposing safeties. So they rank dead last as far as tackles per game go to the safety position. Quentin Lake, I got a safety 22 this week. Cam Curl is like more safety 4 type range. Safety 40 is where I have him. For the Jets, Quinnen Williams is dealing with a hamstring injury, so we don't know if he's going to play or not. Not ideal. It's not a bad matchup. He's somebody that is basically locked into most DT required starting lineups, but if he can't go, there's not a lot of guys that we like as replacements out there. So keep an eye on your waiver wire. Ask questions if you need a Quinnen replacement, and we could talk through some of the options out there. At linebacker for the Jets, Jamie and Sherwood, I got his LB21 this week. It's not a great matchup. Quincy Williams, I got his more kind of like LB3, LB4. Jamie and Sherwood's tackle efficiency compared to Quinnen Williams, I think we highlighted it last week. He's just been so much better. So Quincy Williams not been nearly as productive. Chuck Clark, though, so we've talked about him quite a bit. He finally got a full-time safety role again for the Jets last week instead of that typical kind of 5-man rotation that we've been seeing. Like there's still 5 different starters, but Clark at least got to stay on while the other 4 rotated. And part of that could have been because Jalen Mills got hurt and now he's on injured reserve. So it should be fine if you want to start Chuck Clark, but still kind of avoiding the rest of the group. It's an average matchup as well. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts next. So let's start with the Tennessee linebackers because I'll give you guys the kind of pecking order here for if you're looking for a linebacker out of Tennessee. These are the names in order that I would trust them in. So Kenneth Murray is number 1. I have him as a low-end LB3 this week. So as much as he's the number 1 guy that I trust, he's on the lower range of like 100% snap linebackers for me. It's a bad matchup this week. Colts are 31st in linebackers tackles per game. But I understand there's some deeper leagues out there that need options, and that's where these other guys come in. So Luke Gifford, if he's healthy, we saw him leave last game. He'd definitely be somebody that I would start if I needed it and I'd feel comfortable with. When it gets uncomfortable is if Luke Gifford is out. So if Gifford is out, we're looking at the pecking order of Otis Reese IV, who we saw play as a starter over Jerome Baker previously. Then it's Jerome Baker if he's active because he's been a healthy scratch. The only reason that they would put him in the lineup is because they have no other choice. So he could get a starting role back. And if Jerome Baker, Otis Reese, and Luke Gifford are out, then it's James Williams, who was their 7th round rookie linebacker. And then it's Cedric Gray, but I don't think we're starting Cedric Gray. He's their 4th-round rookie linebacker, and he did not get the start over James Williams. So that is concerning. But James Williams, who we saw last week, really only in play if Gifford, Reese, and Baker are all out. After that, Tennessee safeties, Daryl Worley, Amani Hooker, both more kind of those low-end safety threes this week. I like Harold Landry, edge 16. So he's going up against right tackle Matt Gonzalez. He has a 61.4 pass blocking grade. I think that this is a fine matchup for Landry, just for at least for tackle production. We'll see if he can fall into a sack. Anthony Richardson has been difficult to take down. And Jeffrey Simmons, we're starting him in DT required leagues no matter what. Going to the Colts, their defensive line has a great matchup against the Tennessee offensive line. Now, it isn't Will Levis back there. It's Mason Rudolph, who has definitely been better at avoiding sacks than Levis, but it's still playing behind that offensive line, and Mason Rudolph doesn't scare us as far as pass rushers go. The only thing is the Colts pass rushers, none of them are truly amazing outside of DeForest Buckner, who is DT1 for me this week. Kwity Paye, low-end edge 2. Laiatu Latu, more that kind of low-end edge 3 for me this week. The linebackers, Zaire Franklin, continuing to start him every week. He's like LB4 for me this week. EJ Speed, LB18. Nick Cross, he's another guy. It's not a great matchup, but he's been matchup proof this season because of that box heavy role. So he's another one that stays in our starting lineups. Julian Blackman, not so much playing that deep role in a poor matchup. He's outside of the top 36 safeties for me this week. Let's go to Philadelphia and Washington next, and we'll start with the Philadelphia defensive line because the practice window is open for Bryce Huff. That doesn't really matter right now. I don't think he's not somebody that was playing like significant snaps, so we can continue to trust Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith playing starting roles, and it's actually a decent matchup this week. Jaden Daniels is starting to take more sacks. It happened a lot last week against the Saints. So Josh Sweat, I have his edge 18. Nolan Smith, more that edge 3 type range. Jalen Carter is somebody that I'd like to start in DT required league. So he's inside the top 12. Eagles linebackers, man, these guys have been amazing all season. I know they weren't, Zach Bond specifically didn't blow up last week, but we continue to leave him in lineups. He's LB3 for me this week. Nakobe Dean, LB6. And then the other piece of the Eagles defense here that I wanted to highlight was Cooper DeJean. So he's a nickel corner. We've talked about him before. It's a good matchup overall for cornerbacks against the Commanders. They've yielded 14.1 tackles per game to the position. That's the 6th most. However, the Commanders have not typically been a team that will spend a lot of time in 11 personnel. They're averaging just 56% in that regard. That ranks 25th. And we saw this last week. DeJean will come off the field quite a bit against like the non-11 personnel heavy offenses. I think he only played 67% of snaps against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who ranked just a couple spots behind the Commanders in 11 personnel rate this year. So DeJean really comes in as kind of a fringe starter in CB required leagues this week due to the combination of just like lower playing time and the strong tackle matchup is what kind of helps his case. On the Washington side, so their linebackers, Bobby Wagner, I have his LB9 this week. Frankie Louvu, I have his LB30. Frankie Louvu, both had a prime matchup last week and kind of shit the bed, but Louvu specifically really let down IDP managers because he could have at least had a chance to get a sack in that matchup against the Saints, but like this has kind of been the concern with Louvu all year. We've talked about this, right? He has a very low tackle floor, and he's one of the more boom bust linebackers every single week, which we don't necessarily want from our linebackers. And even though it was a great matchup last week on paper, he was not able to come through. So you guys don't need to hear me talk about the boom bust nature of Louvu anymore. We talked about it enough. So the matchup is good again, at least for tackles. The Eagles are giving up the 4th most tackles per game to the linebacker position, but Louvu is still going to be in that LB3 range just because of his highs and lows every single week. Washington defensive line, we trusted Dorrance Armstrong and Deron Payne last week just because of the matchup against the Saints. Tougher to trust these guys this week against the Eagles. Not necessarily in starting consideration here. Oh shit, I've changed the slide. So Jeremy Chin is the only other piece for Washington here. We actually saw him get knocked out cold last week, so he's going to be questionable with a concussion. I don't expect that he's going to play this week. Derek Forrest was actually the guy that replaced him and actually got a box heavy deployment, so maybe he takes that role, does a better job with it than Curl. I don't know. Maybe he's week 15 Dane Belton or week 16 Dane Belton. It's hard to say, but it's not a good matchup. It's a below average matchup for safeties. So really, Derek Forrest is just a name we should consider because of the potential deployment in the box and only for deeper leagues right now. Okay, now I can change the slide and go to the Minnesota Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks. So starting with the Minnesota defensive line, I don't know that it's going to be Sam Howell. So at quarterback for the Seahawks, because it seems like Geno Smith was a full participant in practice today on Wednesday. So that's a really good sign for Geno's availability. Maybe not so much for like our pass rushers, because we want Sam Howell back there at quarterback. This man last year was calling him the sack fetishist because nobody took more sacks than him last season, and it just seemed like he liked it. He was doing it so much. So we saw it again on Sunday Night Football, right? It was like a 33.3% pressure to sack conversion rate, 4 sacks on 19 dropbacks. Like, this man has negative pocket awareness. So yeah, it's likely going to be Geno. It's still a good matchup with Geno back there. I think I have Sam Howell's numbers on the screen right now. Yes, those are Sam Howell's numbers. Because I didn't expect Geno to be ready, but it might be turning that way. So either way, Jonathan Greenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, among other pass rushers, Brian Flores, of all coaches too, against potentially Sam Howell or Geno Smith, he's going to blitz a ton. He's going to send a lot at him. I expect these guys to be able to get home, whether it's Geno Smith or Sam Howell back there. So Greenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, for the most part, are going to be staying in IDP lineups. Blake Cashman, this is not a good matchup for linebackers. The Seahawks actually ranked dead last as far as tackles per game to the linebacker position. So Blake Cashman is kind of on that low end LB3 range for me this week, where the safeties I actually like a little bit more. Josh Metellus specifically, I got a safety 5. It's a top 10 matchup for tackles to the safety position. We've talked about Josh Metellus a couple weeks in a row now, and he's been delivering for us quite nicely, playing that box heavy role, essentially playing that LB2 role with Ivan Pace out of the lineup. For Seattle, I like Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams is DT6. He's staying in lineups for the most part. The Seattle linebackers. So Ernest Jones, I got his LB14, but I think Tyrese Knight is interesting as well. So Tyrese Knight actually played a full-time role in week 15 for the first time this season. So that gives IDP managers who have been trusting him in deeper leagues more confidence about him being a starter in week 16. Like, he also owns a very strong 17.1% tackle rate this season. That should help him in what's really just kind of been an average matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings. They're allowing the 13th most tackles per game to opposing linebackers, though they have allowed the fewest tackles per game, 11.7 over the past 3 games, which keeps Knight in kind of more of that LB3 range, even if he is going to play 100% of snaps. But for those of you in those deeper leagues who have been trusting Tyrese Knight as a starter, gets a nice little boost here. And for those of you who have Tyrese Knight on the waiver wire and are looking for closer to a full-time player, he now becomes one of those options. And then there's safeties in Seattle. So Julian Love, continue to like him quite a bit. I got him as safety 9. I'm not as interested in Kobe Bryant this week. So Kobe Bryant playing an 81% snap share deep. So that's a really high number for a deep alignment, and not something that, for a guy that has been very productive lately, it's not encouraging for that production to remain sustainable, right? So he's coming off a week where I think he had 8 tackles. He had an interception the week before, I think a pick 6 a couple weeks before that. But that deep safety role, it just creates duds more often than not. And he's facing Minnesota, who ranked 28th in tackles per game to opposing safety. So he's at risk for like that 4 tackle game kind of thing. So I'm just trying to avoid Kobe Bryant right now, as much as we might like the name. All right, on to Jacksonville and the Las Vegas Raiders next. Looks like Desmond Ritter at quarterback again, I think. So um, don't mind it for the pass rushers. Josh Hines Allen, like it's not an easy matchup for him going against the left tackle, Colton Miller. Colton Miller actually has like a top 10 pass blocking grade on the year, but Josh Hines Allen has the top 10 pass rush grade on the year. So it should be a great matchup. I have Hines Allen as edge 12 this week. Trayvon Walker, edge 19. Foye Aluakon is clearly one of the other options here. I got him as LB 17 this week. It's a below average matchup for linebackers. Devin Lloyd, who's been really quiet lately, more of kind of an LB4. So that's really the entire Jacksonville defense that we're considering for the most part. So let's go to the Las Vegas Raiders. And first off, it kills me that we don't get to talk about Max Crosby here. I feel like I jinxed it by constantly highlighting his Iron Man streak, and now here we are. So I don't know, man. Maybe I commit seppuku at the end of this recording to make up for it, or something. I don't know what the hell. Have you guys watched Shogun? That's what I'm referencing here. What a stupid thing to say. Anyways, Caleb Von Chason is in the meantime absorbed the Max Crosby workhorse role, played 98% of the defensive snaps last week. That is huge. So Caleb Von Chason, look, he's average at best as a pass rusher, 68.1 pass rush grade on the year, but the snaps are excellent, and he's also still better than what he's been for the majority of his NFL career this year. So it's like a fine matchup for pass rushing this week against like the adult Rizzler there, Mac Jones, and the Jaguars offensive line. So like if you're looking for, a potential streamer this week, Chason, he's got the snap share, matchups not bad. I don't hate it if you have to go to him. And then Trayvon Merrick as well, coming off a very down game after getting us excited about him again in week 14. Like his usage did shift though this past week, where he was playing less in the box, which was a sudden change, and more in the slot. So he just played 29% in the box when he was playing around half of his snaps in the box before that, at least since making that change to that role. And that definitely hurt his production, right? It's worth noting that Isaiah Polamau, like he did not overtake that box heavy role that Merrick was in, because I know, he had the better tackle game and all that. So people might be wondering that. He did not. Polamau's role did not change. He's playing more of the deep safety role. So still like Merrick more than Polamau, but more kind of low end safety too for me right now. And then Spillane and Diablo. I got Spillane as LB 22. Diablo is like LB 50-ish in that kind of range. Again, not a full-time player, not a great matchup. So both of these guys on the lower end of their usual spectrum this week. Okay, moving to San Francisco and Miami next. So we'll start with Nick Bosa, because Nick Bosa, I have his edge 5 this week. He came back last week. He had a 3-game absence, and he looked good. He did not appear to be limited in any kind of way. He played 76% of his snaps, which is right about his usual snap range. He had a 27% win rate, 27% pressure rate. Those are really good numbers. 3 QB hits, no sacks, but look, I'm fine to start him every single week, and I don't think that changes this week here against Kendall Lamb at I think it'll be right tackle, and the Miami Dolphins. Kendall Lamb's been solid, but he's not on that Nick Bosa level. So Tua gonna have to keep up, I think, that kind of elite time to throw to avoid Nick Bosa. We talked about that last week. It's definitely a risk for our pass rushers versus Tua, but when he isn't getting the ball out super quick, there is room for, to make this an above average matchup for pass rushers. So still like Nick Bosa quite a bit. The other interesting name, also returning from injury, but a much longer absence. We haven't seen Dre Greenlaw since last year's Super Bowl, where he tore his Achilles, but he did return last week. And I mean, this guy was clearly motivated to make an impact, despite being eased back into the lineup. So He played less than half of the defensive snaps last week, so 46%, which honestly might not be super obvious from looking at the box score because he posted an unreal 30% tackle rate last week. The only concern in trusting him is that I think he does increase his snap share. I just worry that it's going to be like a incremental increase and he might not get to that 100% of snaps in time for us to trust him in our lineups, and that includes this week. So the 49ers season, it's over, and Greenlaw is a pending free agent. So he'll either want to showcase the value or his value, I guess, and his health to either the 49ers or a future NFL team. Um, or the 49ers will try not to risk him and continue to kind of ease him back in the lineup. And the fact that, maybe he's on the field in the first place, like that could be good enough where, 100% snap roll won't necessarily be necessary for, potential suitors in free agency because D Winters could get some work. They've been trying to work him in a little bit here recently. Devondre Campbell, he was a non-factor in this trio anyways. Winter was playing ahead of him, so that doesn't change much for this week. So I have a hard time trusting Greenlaw this week. I got him as like LB 49. Fred Warner, I got his LB 11. He finally had a great game last week. So it's a nice matchup, that's for sure. The Dolphins giving up the fourth most tackles per game to the linebacker position, but if you're worried like about his incremental snap increase like I am for Dre Greenlaw, then it's going to be difficult to trust him in most lineups. And then the other player returning from injury for the 49ers last week was Talanoa Hufanga. So I got him as safety 16 this week. Now, he also didn't play his usual full-time role. He played 74% of snaps, I think it was. But I think he is one of those guys that they'll be fine to increase his role since it was more of kind of a short-term injury. So he played 34% of his snaps in the box last week. This is the second best matchup for safety tackles. So like Hufanga in that safety 2 range this week. On Miami, Zach Sealer, continue to like him. I got him as DT7 this week. It's not as good of a matchup as it was last week, but he's found ways to be effective. The linebackers for Miami, I got Jordan Brooks as LB7. Anthony Walker is another one of those full-time linebackers who's just on the lower end of the spectrum for me this week. I got him as like a low-end LB3. Again, it's not a great matchup, so I tend to lean toward the guy that I trust the most as being the one that I think will get the majority of tackles, and that's Jordan Brooks. And then the safeties, Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland. This is a nice matchup for them, but I do prefer Jordan Poyer over Holland at this point. Poyer has just been the more efficient player through this season. So like him in that safety 2 range as well. All right, Sunday Night Football, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. So starting with Tampa Bay, let's see. Let's go with their defensive line as well. Nothing like overly exciting here. Like these guys are all kind of in that streamer territory. Even Yaya Diaby more of the edge 3. Kalijah Cansey, Vita Vea more in that DT2 type range. Their linebackers, Levante David, like the matchup for him. I got him as LB16. He hasn't been super efficient as a tackler, but he's made up for it with some big plays. And the Cowboys are a nice matchup for linebacker tackles, so that should help. JJ Russell or KJ Britt, whichever one is able to go. I should say if KJ Britt is active, he's going to be the one that's going to be the starter. But if he's not active, then it's JJ Russell in his place. But neither one of these guys are full-time players. It's going to be difficult to plug them into lineups. But for deeper leagues, those are the options that we're considering. And then the Tampa Bay defensive backs. These guys all sucked last week. I don't know if anybody had more than a tackle from this group, but Tyke Smith this week, at least, I got his cornerback 18. Dallas is at least 6th in 11 personnel rate. They're 11th in tackles per game to the cornerback position, which is what Tyke Smith typically plays. So I don't hate it for him as a potential streamer. Christian Izien and either Mike Edwards or Kayvon Merriweather, these guys are just fill-in options if we need them. We've yet to see them do anything overly encouraging with those snaps. So on Dallas, Micah Parsons, he stays in our starting lineups. We're not taking him out of our starting lineups. I don't know what else I need to say there. The Dallas linebackers, Eric Kendricks, I got his LB28 this week. It's a below average matchup there. But Maris Lufau, so I'll talk about him a little bit because he's a different name. So he played 87% of snaps last week. I think this was better than expected, though. Even though it wasn't like the overshown level of what he gave us, like for deeper leagues, I think we're fine to trust Maris Lufau if needed. So it's not, again, it's a below average matchup, but we're running out of options potentially in a lot of leagues. So Maris Lufau could be somebody that deeper leagues are relying on this week. Other than that, Jordan Lewis, their cornerback for the Cowboys, I got his potential streaming option this week. He plays a slot role for the Cowboys. Tampa Bay is one of those more 11 personnel heavy offenses. I think they're like 8th, but they are giving up the 5th most tackles per game to cornerbacks. So Jordan Lewis is in a nice spot to produce this week if you're looking for a potential streamer. And the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, New Orleans Saints and the Green Bay Packers. So starting with New Orleans, their defensive line against the Packers offensive line. So we mentioned Chase Young in his revenge game last week. He ended up with 2 sacks, so even better than expected. It's a much tougher matchup this week for Chase Young and for Carl Granderson and for Cameron Jordan. Like these guys are on the lower ends of potential edge starters in like 3 edge leagues kind of thing. The Packers are the top or a top pass blocking unit in the league, and Jordan Love is still excellent at navigating the pocket and avoiding sacks or getting the ball out in time. So that makes it tougher for this entire Saints defensive line. Guys like Demario Davis, he's getting hot at linebacker. He's still like LB27 for me. 11.6% tackle rate. That's below average for the year, even though he's been better these past 2 weeks. He's made some big plays as well. So he's not a bad option. He's playing 100% of snaps. It's just there's other ones that I like a little bit more this week. And then their cornerbacks as well. Ugo Amadi and Alontae Taylor. So not as good of a matchup for them this week. Green Bay is also just slightly above average in 11 personnel at 67%. So not the end of the world for Amadi as far as his playing time goes, but like part of his upside as a blitzer and getting sacks is kind of limited here with Jordan Love at quarterback. But again, it's not a terrible matchup. It's just like a right around average for cornerback tackles, but not as excited about either one of those guys as necessarily would be in previous weeks. Okay, Green Bay now. So starting with Rashawn Gary, got off to a really slow start to the year, but he now has 5.5 sacks over his last 8 games, which I think has a chance to continue this week because it's such a good matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Now, he's going to line up against both offensive tackles for the Saints, but mostly versus right tackle Trevor Penning, who ranks just 71st among 80 qualifying offensive tackles in pass blocking grade this season. And then helping matters for Gary is that the Saints are likely starting Spencer Rattler at quarterback, who owns a 28% pressure to sack conversion rate, which is the 3rd worst mark among quarterbacks this season. For Gary, his pass rush metrics haven't been strong enough to again, push him into maybe that edge 12, edge 15 range for the week, but the matchup itself, at least, it offers enough of a boost to have him in that kind of low end edge 2 range for me this week. For the linebackers for Green Bay, because this is also interesting, Eric Wilson, his value lies entirely in the availability of Quay Walker, who right now considered week to week. So I think he's very unlikely to play. But Eric Wilson took over the every down role in Quay Walker's absence, not just last week when Walker went down, but in previous weeks as well. Week 7 and 8, we saw this. So the Packers have shown a clear replacement plan at the position, while both guys like Edgerrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie actually rotate drives. Now, Wilson He certainly hasn't been the most effective tackler. He's not Edgerrin Cooper in that regard when he's on the field, but a full-time role against the New Orleans Saints, who are allowing the eighth most tackles per game to opposing linebackers. I don't think this is something that we should be ignoring if we're looking for a fill-in starter this week, because he's likely going to play close to 100% of the snaps. So you like that for Eric Wilson. Edgerrin Cooper, he's been excellent. He's making some big plays. I wouldn't rule out big plays for him this week against the New Orleans Saints either. He just comes with a little bit more risk if he's not going to play that full-time role, which it does not seem like he will. So like Eric Wilson as a potential waiver wire and fill-in option this week is on the lower end of LB3 or higher end LB4 this week. And then the Green Bay defensive back. So Keyshawn Nixon, I got a CB6, Xavier McKinney, safety 12. Javon Bullard didn't play last week. I think he's, a fine safety 3 if he plays. If Javon Bullard is out, Nixon will get the slot role again, even if Jair Alexander is also out. So they did show that tendency, Green Bay, that if both Alexander and Bullard are out, they prefer Nixon in the slot as opposed to staying outside. The only thing is the slot role, it might not be as prominent this week against the Saints, who only play 32% of their snaps in 11 personnel, which ranks second last in the league. So it's not as amazing of a matchup for Keyshawn Nixon, but he's been excellent all season. So like him still as a potential streamer. Okay, that is a wrap on this week. Thank you all for tuning in, liking, subscribing, leaving kind reviews, all that stuff. I really do appreciate you all. Again, I hope that helps you get through to the championship round. And if there is anything else that I can help with, I am happy to do it. So please feel free to ask questions in the comments if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll have the IDP fantasy report linked into the episode description. That's out now. IDP rankings article will be linked in the episode description, as well as the IDP rankings page, where updates, to the ranks, like when injuries and stuff like that become more clear closer to game time. Those will be housed in there. So, we'll see if I post the updated fantasy playoff schedule for best and worst tackle matchups this week, since there's only 2 weeks left, and we could kind of treat that as, a game by game here. We're not necessarily preparing ahead because it's one and done. So yeah, maybe not posting that one this week, but I'll maybe post the link to the tackles allowed in there instead this week, just for the week. So yeah, other than that, I'll be back on Monday morning with a week 16 IDP recap, hopefully coming off a win myself. A couple wins would be nice. That always helps. But either way, I'll be back to highlight the top takeaways, which will probably be the last one of that takeaway show for the year, since the fantasy season will have wrapped up pretty much by the week after that. So we'll be wrapping up our typical in-season schedule as well, and transitioning into more off-season content once that happens. So again, good luck this week, and until next time, peace out.